Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Carly with WESC. For those who are unfamiliar, we host a free webinar, usually on a monthly basis, but now on a weekly basis. These webinars are recorded and can be viewed on demand at any time on our website. Today, our topic is Be Well to Do Well, Deepening Your Wellness for Work and Life, presented by Wendy Turner Larson. If you have any questions during the presentation, please write them in the chat box. I will let Wendy decide if she wants to answer them during the presentation or at the end. Thank you so much, Wendy, for joining us today. Please start whenever you're ready.
So hi there, and thank you so much for having me. I'm going to just switch on an extra light. Sorry for the delay. I think it's a really important topic, and I want to talk to you about some of my work with neuroscience. And it's not really complex. It's very understandable, and there's some very practical tools and tips that you can do and use for yourself. My belief is that our business and work and our leadership all starts with us. And most of my work is devoted to psychological, mental, emotional wellness. So I want to start with a story. I am a leadership coach. I am a psychologist. My background is in psychology, and I bring all of that forward in my work. I've studied neuroscience, and I have a master's in counseling psychology, a master's in adult education and leadership. And so I weave all of that together, and most of my work is with leaders. So a few years ago, a young woman, I'll call her Sally, came to me. She was in her early 30s, and she had recently been promoted to a new leadership role. And there were some challenges for her in this role. She was a young leader. She had not had a lot of leadership experience before, but it was clear that she was up for the challenge. Her boss told me and told her that she needed to work on her communication with her team, that she held back, that she was not always clear. But there was really much more to this. My work, I don't just coach the skills, I really want to coach the person. So as we explored this, with her, it was clear that confidence, a lack of confidence was showing up. A lack of confidence was showing up because she was really pushing herself hard and was trying to be perfect and do everything perfect. This was all showing up because I believe that she really didn't believe in herself or believe that she was enough. And a lot of my work centers around that core belief and shifting us towards that we really are enough. What happened, she was anxious and nervous a lot in her role, and on weekends and in her personal life, she was working a lot. She avoided conversations. She was really fearful that she was not going to be a good enough leader. And because of all this, she put enormous pressure on ourselves. And I'm pretty sure that most of us can relate, whether we own our businesses, we're in business, or we are leaders. I think it's important to look at how we can really shift that. A lot of her anxiety, I believe, had to do with her thoughts about herself. And this is what I'll talk about today. I'm going to talk about two key areas that are related to neuroscience that can really shift us out of stress and overwhelm. And the times that we're in, although we're shifting back to the workplace, there's an enormous amount of pressure on us. And there's a lot of things showing up for business owners and leaders in terms of how we feel that we've maybe not noticed before. So that's why I really want to talk today about how to be well so that you can do well. A second client of mine, probably in her early 40s, came to me for coaching to address imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome has been written about, but really it's the belief that someone will find out that you don't know what you're doing, that you're a fraud. And same thing, as we explored this really showed up for her as not believing that she was really enough, and that she wouldn't be able to perform in the way that people expected, that she didn't belong at the leadership table. So both of these women were incredibly intelligent, skilled, great leadership skills. They were compassionate leaders. But the thing that got in the way for them was their beliefs about themselves. And I'm going to talk today about how to shift those beliefs. For them, and for many of us, this causes a great deal of stress for us. So they might have been performing outwardly well as a leader, but internally they put a lot of pressure and stress on themselves. Both of them were worn out. They were getting exhausted, but they kept pushing. And one of the other things that shows up a lot in situations like this, or when we're struggling with this, is busy thoughts, replaying over and over what we said or what we did, and not replaying it in a compassionate way, but in a very judgmental way. So that's backwards. The fact that we continue to push and go hard and we don't pay attention to ourselves. And if we do pay attention to ourselves, we don't know where to start. We don't know what to do in terms of self care or emotional or psychological wellness. And the truth is, there are a lot of very good things that all of us can do. And today I want to talk about two things that I believe have the biggest impact and have the biggest potential to shift us to feeling better, to managing stress, to feeling more at ease, to running our businesses and leading and working in a way that we have joy and contentment and flow. So, given the times that we're in, I think that it's an opportunity to connect more fully with ourselves, to access all of that greatness within us. We have a great deal of potential. Entrepreneurs are problem solvers. If there's a problem, they figure out what to do, and they quickly shift. So that's what good entrepreneurs do. Um, our wellness doesn't always look that way. It's not always something that we can fix. And because a lot of you here are probably doers, action takers, that this idea of slowing down and taking care of ourselves is really quite a big shift. And so I think that that's part of the opportunity that we have here today. So the call is to be well first. And this idea of attention to ourselves and self care is not new, but many struggle with this because our beliefs about ourselves hold us back and cause us an enormous amount of distress. This concept about self care and wellness has not been a part of mainstream business until recently. I've worked in this for a number of years and believe it's essential. But business often focuses on profits and results. And so, what leaders are starting to write about is about self care. Some successful leaders, I'm reading articles about how self care is first and foremost for our lives, our wellness, and then for our businesses. I don't look at self care as a superficial kind of self care, like shopping or getting our nails or our hair done, although those things can be necessary. But today I'm going to present a robust way, type of self care that really has the potential to change your life and then change your business. Shift one more. So if you can think about your life as a glass of water, and on the left, when we are overwhelmed, when there's a lot going on, our life can be very full and not very clear. What I'm going to talk about today is for you to think about how to clear out that sludge. And there's some neuroscience techniques that you can do that so that your brain, your mind, your heart is clear and that you can be fully yourself. So as I said, the call is, in order to be well, uh, in order to do well, we have to be well. And this really starts with us. And what I've talked about, those two women that I shared, some of what they were working on and some of what they were struggling with, the key thing was lack of attention to themselves and then their negative thinking about themselves. There's lots of other things that contribute to our stress, but these are the things that we can control. There's so much going on right now that we cannot control. So what I'm going to share with you today is what you can control. The two areas that change your brain is self-compassion and then positivity. The brain exercises have to do with positivity. This has the potential to pull you out of stress, and overwhelm has the potential to help you keep that glass of water, your life more clear, so that when stressful things come along, you're able to absorb it into the positivity. So this actually, what we know about our brains now is that they're neuroplastic. That means they can be changed. You can calm your amygdala, which is what I'm going to talk about today. The amygdala is the emotional center of your brain. That's what gets triggered into fight, flight, or freeze. And what we've been going through the last few months, this collective challenge, can and has impacted a lot of us. So some of what I'm going to talk about today, self-compassion, is how to respond to setbacks, how to speak to yourself, and then brain exercises based in positivity and positive psychology. The science of that is actually a more proactive way to keep yourself well. So to start with, I want to talk about self-compassion. So I shared that there will be two things. First of all, self-compassion. And self-compassion is actually not how we're made. We're really wired to our brain to see, what are the problems so that we can fix them, or so that we can run away from them, or so that we can solve them. And our brain is wired to see the negative. So most of us think negative about ourselves. And so if you find that's true about yourself, just know that that's normal. That's normal human behavior, based in science. But the power of self-compassion is about changing the way you speak to yourself, the way you think about yourself, the way that you talk to yourself, and shifting it to a much kinder way. Because a lot of times what happens, and that's what happened with the two women that I was working with, that I shared about, is that when they did have a setback, they were harder on themselves. They beat themselves up. And that actually makes the amygdala more triggered. And in this state of fight, flight, or freeze, we have a physiological response when we speak to ourselves. So when we speak to ourselves in a kinder manner, especially when we've had a setback or we think we haven't measured up, that will change your brain. It's a positive thinking approach to yourself. So this idea of attention to yourself, I believe it's as important as breathing. And if we're uncomfortable with attention to ourselves, know that that's normal, because a lot of you are probably go-getters. You get lots done. But our own needs, and in some cases our own needs first, are essential. And again, we've been under a great deal of stress and pressure these last few months. So I've written a book that will come out in the fall, and this book is for women, Becoming You for Women, which is unraveling what is not us, but all these tips and tools to help us get to a place where we're fully ourselves. So this is what I said about self-compassion in my book. Self-compassion provides comfort in discomfort, just like compassion from another person provides comfort. Self-compassion invites you to love yourself in the midst of struggles. It allows you to shift to you, not the problem or the situation. So as I said, self-compassionate thoughts have the ability to change your brain, to calm your amygdala, actually heal your amygdala so it's not in constant fight or flight. And the way that you talk to yourself, the way that we talk to ourselves, our deep self-judgment causes a stress response in our brains, and it increases negative neural pathways that become almost impossible to get out of. So I call this, I call self-compassion fierce love. It's self-compassion versus self-judgment. So this is not a one-time thing. Both these women didn't come to one session and try this once. They had lots of follow-up. We broke it down into parts. They talked about some of their struggles and how they responded to their struggles. And we talked about how to talk to themselves in a much kinder way. They also did the brain practices, which I'll talk about next. But here's an example of what we tend to do and how we're judging ourselves versus being compassionate to ourselves. So another woman in the last few months, a lot of those that I'm speaking to are still expecting so much of themselves, expecting that they can still do and perform, uh, uh, self-manage, time management, all of that, the way that they could before. And I found for myself that I'm struggling more with time management. I'm struggling more with being organized, and I'm struggling more with being motivated. And these aspects, self compassion and the brain exercises that I'm sharing with you today, actually help me with both of that. I don't think I've slipped as far as I would have without these. So here's what self judgment looks like. So one of my leadership clients, she was really hard on herself. She was sharing with me how, right before her workplace had to go home, that when COVID hit, that she was withdrawing from her team. And so she said to me, "Isn't that great?" Sarcastically, "Isn't that what a great leader does? Here I am distancing and being separate when they need me." And so that's what self judgment sounds like. And it doesn't help us explore what the behavior is about or even figure out what we need. But I talked to her a little bit more about this. So because I could feel that her anxiety was actually increasing. She was already, you know, feeling bad about her team. She was probably under a great deal of stress herself, having to move home to work. But here she was really being hard on herself because she couldn't be that perfect leader. So she was judging herself and feeling worse, not better. So in the middle of our conversation, I asked her, and these are the two questions that I think are very powerful for you that can help you with be more self-compassionate. So I asked her, before you were withdrawing and pulling away from your team, what were you feeling? That's the important question. So when I asked her that, she paused, and even that question seemed to calm her down a bit and got her out of self judgment. But know this, we can judge how we feel too. So it's important that when you ask yourself what you feel, that you're not judging what you're feeling. So then I could explore with her, based on what you were feeling, what are you feeling now? And, based on that, what do you need? Maybe you don't need as many meetings. Maybe you tell your team that you're struggling and you're not going to be there for them as much as you would like to be, and that you just share that humanness. But her judgment right in the beginning about withdrawing, she had this idea that she should be a great leader, she should improve her leadership. But in fact, her vulnerability could create more connection with her team. So when we don't attend to ourselves and take care of that, we'll push beyond our limits. And if we just judge our thoughts or judge our behavior, we never really get to the bottom of it. And the bottom of it is asking these two questions of yourself in the midst of a hard time or a struggle, a short challenge or a long challenge. Ask yourself, what am I feeling? And then allow yourself to notice what you're feeling and not to judge the feeling that this is wrong, this is stupid. This process is not about other people, it's about you. And so this idea or this practice of asking yourself what you're feeling actually calms your amygdala, because your amygdala is in fight or flight before, and you're pushing and pressuring yourself and you're making it worse for your brain. And so once the first question, what am I feeling? Then the second question, what am I needing? Like I did with her. So if you've acted in a way that you don't like, explore how the behavior was a way of perhaps keeping yourself safe emotionally and psychologically. It doesn't mean you just withdraw and do nothing, but being vulnerable with people, letting them know how you're doing and what you need. And so this was a practice for her of starting to become more kind towards herself, becoming more self compassionate, which is what the other two women did as well. So just noticing, where you're really hard on yourself, where you have really high expectations. And, in situations, asking yourself, what do you feel? And then going to, what is it that you really need? So, I do believe that one of the biggest causes of anxiety and overstress for us is how we speak to ourselves. We have this scolding inner voice, and that when we do the opposite, we change that scolding inner voice to a voice that's much kinder, that says, you're doing a good job. What are you needing? Do you need a break? Being that really supportive friend to yourself is what self-compassion is really about. So when you do that, you're not just working on yourself emotionally, you're working on yourself physiologically. You are changing your brain. We have these old neural pathways, they're called, and I like to think about them as like ruts in a road. So if you've driven in rural Saskatchewan, say after a rain and it's dried up a bit, there's going to be ruts in the grid road. And so negative neural pathways are like that. The moment we think or feel something, we're scared, we go into those ruts in the road and it takes us down um, a spiral of negativity and we feel worse, not better. So, self compassion and the brain exercise help you create new pathways on that road, help you get out of the ruts of the negative pathways much more quickly. And the interesting thing about this is we know this, um, but science is starting to prove it. There is the science about positive psychology that when we motivate ourselves with kindness, we have more energy, we're more calm, and we're actually more productive. So back to Sally, the client I told you about in the beginning that was in that new leadership position. The practice of self-compassion was a really big shift to her. And at first, she really didn't buy into it. But as she bought into it, started to practice, she could see how being kinder towards herself helped her actually get things done because she was less stressed. I mean, she had enough on her plate being a young leader, and a lot of the people that reported to her were much older and had a lot of experience. So that's a lot of pressure already without the judgment that she was piling on herself. But as she learned to not beat herself up as much and started to notice when she was thinking negatively about herself, which is the key to switching our thoughts, to being more self compassionate, we have to notice. And sometimes the thoughts are so ingrained in us that we don't notice. So for her, this took practice, but she became much more at ease with herself. Even the women who work with me, who are coaches and trained professionals, they have master's degrees. They're incredibly successful and great and have been great leaders. The other day, we were having a conversation, and a couple of them were talking about their need for lists. And I noticed by the way that they talk, they quickly shifted into self judgment about a list, saying something like, "Why? Why do I do that?" When we ask that kind of why, it's actually judgmental. It's like saying, "That's stupid that I do this." We were just talking about lists, but I asked them. I think I said something like, "Maybe lists make you feel safe. You can count on them." And you see, if we judge our behavior, we never understand it and we never go deeper and are able to change it. So, self compassionate is the way that you accept who you are and what you did. And that acceptance isn't an excuse. But it allows, I know that, and you know this, when you're accepting of other people, you can see them calm down. Their brain isn't being triggered, their nervous system isn't being triggered. That being compassionate and kind is a incredible way to heal other people. So doesn't it make sense that we do that with ourselves? So a couple things about self-compassion that you can do it by this, by reframing. Notice when you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed or sad. Notice how what you feel gives you a greater power to be resilient. I emphasize developing this capacity because it's so foundational that once you know what you feel, you might not even be aware of what you're saying to yourself. But if you can reframe it instead of saying, "Isn't that stupid that I need to make lists?" Reframing it to, "You know what? Lists help me get things done." Isn't that what's wrong with me? I can't get as much done anymore. That you reframe it to, I'm getting as much done as I can, and I need to have time for pause and rest. And so you can even feel the difference in the energy in that judgment, which is pushing. You're not enough. You need to do more. To self compassion, which is really accepting. The energy is very different. And again, this is a practice. So reframing might also look like things aren't going right. You're feeling incredibly frustrated, so you pause. Pause is really important. It allows your brain to calm down. And if you don't continue to push yourself, you can allow your amygdala some time to recover. With the amount of stress and change that we've been through, we really need to take time to de-stress and recover. Lots of people are saying that they're, more fatigued, they're more tired, and things aren't necessarily getting back to normal. Things are opening up, but there's still a lot of uncertainty. So, doesn't it make sense, even more so now, to think about and consider being self-compassionate? So, think about, your last week. Think about some of the challenges you faced, and think about responding to yourself with a lot more compassion and understanding. We push ourselves so hard, and it has an impact on our brain. And self compassion, this kindness, really can change your brain, can create new neural pathways. So that's the piece on self compassion. And the second part that I want to talk to you about today, which also fits with self compassion, is leveraging what is positive to change your brain. And this is a more proactive way of creating more calm, more peace, and more contentment in your life. So, positive psychology, which is what I'm going to talk about and give you some tools as to actually how you can do this, focuses more on what is right with you rather than what is wrong with you. Most of us know what is wrong with ourselves. And negative emotions and experiences, failures and challenges are all a normal part of life. And so with positivity, we don't ignore these. It's just like those two glasses, those glasses of water. And I should just shift back to that. Yeah, the two glasses of water that, the power of positivity helps keep your mind, your heart, your soul, your body more clear. Remember that it's negativity and negative thoughts that clutters up our life, that creates the sludge in our lives, like this glass. So, when we focus on what is wrong and what is negative, we create more fear. We deepen those neural pathways, those ruts in the road, and you will feel worse. It will be harder to get out of negativity. And, there's even the science of happiness right now. So I think Sean Acor, who is well known for his research on happiness, he says this: we can retrain the brain to scan for the good things in life, to help us see more possibility, to feel more energy, and to even succeed at higher levels. So this is not about denying what is hard in your life, but training yourself to notice what is good in your life and let your brain kind of attach to that, so that your brain can change. So there's a study that I love to talk about by Dr. Daniel Amen, who is a neuro psychiatrist. And he does brain scans of his patients before and after. And he feels that, looking at the brain helps him diagnose what's going on and then figure out a proper treatment. So, but this particular use of a brain scan was about a study. He was working with a psychologist who was studying gratitude. And he did a first brain scan of her brain after she focused on her fears for a few days, and our brain shows what happens. So what happened with the first brain scan, he talks about different areas of the brain being shut down, like the cerebellum. That has to do with coordination, processing information, integrating new information. Another part of the brain had been affected, which has to do with mood, memory, and temper control. And that was all because of her focusing on negative things and things that she was afraid of for several days. And so we know that when we're stressed, doesn't it make sense that sometimes taking in new information is really hard? You've just tapped out, or why we can become forgetful or even clumsy. But what's interesting is I used to just think things happened to us and we felt a certain way based on what happened. But this research and the work I've done with my clients and with myself has shown that you can choose, you have within your power to feel very differently, to feel much more positive. And self compassion is one way. And these brain exercises are another way. So, what we know is what we focus on grows. If we focus on negativity and bringing that in, we'll feel worse. And in fact, I think we even start to notice more things that are wrong. However, the flip side that's very powerful for you today, and which really, I am not saying this lightly, has really changed the lives of many of my clients in my groups, power circle groups, and my workshops and one-on-one coaching, is that this idea and practicing focusing on the good, focusing on self-compassion, can really change your life. So that's why I'm sharing these two things with you today. So, first of all, with positivity, we need to look at what to stop. And then, secondly, what to start. So, what to stop? Complaining. Do you need to say what you want to say? Asking yourself, does this have any value? Will it help you? Will it help the other person? Is this information that they actually need or that you need to tell them? So I heard about this, several years ago, and actually I went through a program about 3 years ago on all of this. So I really started working on really considering and thinking about what I talked about. And so I remember driving home from work one day, and how erratically everybody was driving. And I thought everybody. So as soon as I noticed that, I started to notice worse drivers and worse driving. And I started to build this up in my mind, and I was reviewing it and thinking about how I'm going to tell my husband when I get home, what I'm going to say about this. So it can be like this addiction because there's these, neural pathways that as soon as you start complaining, you go down this spiral of negativity, and it really can take some effort to stop complaining. And so in that moment, because I wasn't home yet, I started to think about complaining and realized I was complaining in my own mind. It had no value, and that I was planning to complain to my husband. And so I thought about it. Does this have any value? No. Is it necessary? No. And so I started to catch those thoughts and the things I wanted to say about situations or other people that actually have no value. There's no reason to talk about it. And there's some research on complaining that it hurts your brain. It actually makes your brain less resilient uh, rather than more resilient. Sometimes when we stop complaining, we don't know what to talk about. And so there might be, silence for a time. So this is even one thing that you could start to remove from your life. You may need to talk about a situation for clarity to determine action, but once that's figured out, do it. Lots of times we just like to be martyrs, and complaining is really about needing somebody else to say, "Oh, isn't that awful? Poor you." But when we realize that that's really negative thinking, and it keeps those negative neural pathways in place. So the brain exercises that I've been mentioning, these are really easy to do. But the magic of them and the success of them is the repetition, doing them daily. They don't take long, and you are thinking anyway. So why not decide what you want to think about? So something that I do, and I've started to slip a little bit lately, but is a morning visualization, and this can take 15 seconds up to 2 to 3 minutes. And the research shows that when we bring in a good feeling And that means absorbing it, letting it settle, allowing yourself to feel a good feeling for 12 seconds, that's what changes the brain. Negative feelings impacts your brain. So as you take some time to feel positive feelings, you can actually make your brain more resilient. This is the self-care piece. This is neuroscience. So it's pretty simple. And I actually talk out loud to myself as I do this, rather than just trying to visualize something, because my brain and my mind will wander. So the way to do this is just to imagine a pleasant scene, whether real or one that you've made up. Often people pick a nature scene, and you think about being right there. Ask yourself, what do I see? I feel the sunlight, on my face. I feel a nice breeze. I feel the sand beneath my hands. So the more you can put yourself there, your brain does not know the difference between something that is real and something that you think about. So if you think about this, your brain takes it as fact and as something that is real. So once you can visualize and feel yourself being fully there, your mind might wander. Then ask yourself, what is the feeling that you feel there? Is it contentment? Is it peace? Is it joy? And keep that scene in your mind while being aware of the feeling. So this takes a little bit of practice. Actually, a lot of us are not that good at even identifying what we feel. So this is something, again, can take you 15 seconds, to a couple minutes. Sometimes I'll forget to do it. Then I take my cup of coffee. I go sit outside because our weather's nice. And I try to, visualize then. If I don't do it first thing in the morning or shortly thereafter, I just end up not doing it. So it's that simple. There's a book, Hardwiring Happiness, by Dr. Rick Hansen, a psychologist in the US, that he explains the science of how positive emotions actually change our brain, make us more resilient, make us more able to manage any sort of stressors, especially, what's going on with us right now. The last thing is at the end of your day, and this is a gratitude piece. Reviewing what was good about your day. And I forget where I read about this, but I started doing it. And the first few days that I did this, it was really hard to think about anything that was good. I would think about, it had to be really big in my mind for it to be good. But remember that what you focus on grows. So as I began to focus on what was good, it seemed like everything in a day was good. I had a nice breakfast. I had a nice cup of coffee. The sun was shining. And so another key piece to this is, as you review your day with what was good, your mind might at first start to go down another path, but this was hard. So it takes some intention and discipline to keep your mind focused on what was good. Um, Allow yourself to feel the feeling of those good events. And if you can even write it down. But I love to do this before I go to sleep, because I once heard somebody say that what you think about before you go to sleep, you marinate on all night long. And so if you're thinking positive thoughts right before you go to sleep, that is more likely to go into your subconscious and begin to change how resilient you are. It will change your brain. There was a study done on gratitude, really simple. People who did 3 good things exercise for a week, they reviewed everybody after a week. They felt happier and less depressed than after a month, too, than the people who did not do it. The study then did the 3-month and 6-month follow-up. And not surprisingly, the happiest participants were the ones who continued the practice throughout. Just 3 good things. Asking yourself at the end of the day, what was good about your day. Again, I've said that we are thinking anyway. Doesn't it make sense to try to shift our thinking to what is positive? And again, it doesn't mean that we don't notice what's negative, But what I've noticed with the people that I've worked with and myself, that as I'm practicing this, it becomes a lot easier to get back to a state of calm when things go sideways. I know for myself and many of my clients these last few months, this is the thing that we can control. So I want to go back to the story of Sally, that young leader that I talked about, right in the beginning. Shortly after working with her, her organization reorged her position. And so, in a way, she was demoted. She didn't get a lateral move. Okay, good. Thank you. Somebody is just saying that this couldn't have been timed better. Extremely beneficial. That's great. Thank you for popping that in. If you do have questions, I'll get to those at the end. But if I notice them in between, I will respond to that as well. So, so Sally, was talking about being reorged. She got demoted. What was really interesting is she didn't love the idea, but she was much more able to understand it logically and then accept it more graciously. And what was interesting is she didn't go into blame about the company, maybe a little bit, but she didn't cycle that down. She was able to get out of that. Look at that. Where is the company responsible? And she did not go into shame, which is beating herself up. So we still had coaching, so we were able to, process a lot of this. And she knew that when she struggled, it was because she was being less self-compassionate towards herself and starting to focus too much on the negative. So what was interesting is then a few months later, actually, I'll tell you some of the things she did about focusing on the good. She was able to walk to work. So instead of thinking about her day or at the end of her work day, walking home from work, reviewing her work day, she just decided to notice the nature around her, to take in the good. That was her kind of self-care meditation time, walking to and from work instead of reviewing everything that was wrong, or bad. So what was interesting though, a few months later, she was let go from her job. That was a surprise to her. We don't really believe that it had to do with her skills. It had to do with, other things going on in the organization and some changes. And the old her would have cycled into shame and anxiety and depression, but she knew how to deal with that. Her glass most of the time was clear. And so when something negative came along, she was able to absorb it into that full glass of positivity. I mean, this was really hard for her, but she didn't hold on to bitterness. She worked through it. The second woman that I shared with you about, the one who had the imposter syndrome, which, as I said, was really about not believing that she mattered. She worked on the same thing, self-compassion regularly, because it changes you fundamentally. That's your foundational belief about yourself. And if that doesn't start with, I have value, then we will struggle. So she worked on that. She worked on the same brain exercises. We added in a few others or adapted. She adapted them to, what worked for her and when, the timing that worked for her. I think it was about 6 or 7 months that really, probably in a couple months, reduced her imposter syndrome, but it's eliminated now, which is really quite amazing. Along with imposter syndrome, we have a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety. So what's happened with her, because that's not there, this doubt about her ability or who she has more confidence to have tough conversations with her staff. So she's actually a better leader. She did get a promotion. And the icing on the cake was when I asked her about imposter syndrome and that she's now sitting at the table with executives. She says, I do not have those thoughts anymore, that I don't belong here. I'm not fighting with my own brain, she said. I can be fully there, present, and take in what is going on. So this is what Be Well to Do Well is about. So as we review, I've given you this information. I've really given you the high level, but it's enough information. The key is implementing it and doing something every day. When I actually was not a proponent of any of this. I thought that this was just superficial thinking. I was studying psychology at a time when positive affirmations were really, a big thing. Writing, "You are beautiful" on a sticky note and putting it on the mirror, and I poo-pooed all of that until I started to read more about this, and there was a lot more science that supported it. And I was running a women's leadership group. I think this was in 2016, the fall of 2016. And part of what we work on in that group is ourselves being well. And so I expect them to do and engage in 3 self-care exercises every single day. So I thought, well, if I'm asking them to do that, I better do that myself. So it took me a while to land on the right things, but one of those things was the morning intention and visualization. And I just kept at it because I, wanted to be accountable to this group. Accountability can really help us stay at this. But about 2 weeks in, I actually noticed a real change. I actually notice a change when I'm not doing it. My mood slips a bit. But as I started to do it, I thought this really works. There's really something happening. Um, and I had gotten home from work a particular day and I had ordered something online. It was the wrong product. I was really frustrated because it had to do with some presentations that I would be doing shortly. And I was really angry at the organization. And so my husband and I went for a walk and I did complain. I'll call it venting for about 7 minutes. And after 7 minutes, I just stopped. It was like those brain practices of creating positive neural pathways. It's like it held that negativity and I just couldn't go on. And you know how after we complain or vent, we still feel worse because we're still thinking about it? I actually stopped thinking about it. There really wasn't anything I could do. I figured out a plan. And so I attribute that to the brain exercises that I was doing in the morning. So there's lots and lots of science about this. Um, so the foundation, self-compassion, being kind to yourself, and then some brain exercises. One I didn't mention was flip your script, which could be as simple as saying to yourself, "I am calm," or "I am confident." Just saying that as often as you want throughout the day. So that's the end of my presentation. So if there's any questions, I'll stay on for a little bit. And again, you can type those questions in the chat box there. The Sean Acor quote. So if you want to find out more from him, that is the science of happiness. But he says this: we can retrain the brain to scan for the good things in life, to help us see more possibility, to feel more energy, and to even succeed at higher levels. The best resource that I think is the simplest and explanation of changing your brain is really easy is Hardwiring Happiness. Excuse me. That's the book that I've worked through, with some friends. It just helps keep me accountable. So if there's any other questions, feel free to ask that. I'll put those books. I do have some resources, so as you're asking your questions, I have some resources. You can find me at my website, turnerlarson.com. And so I do a lot of work on mental health in organizations as well, but lots of, individual and group work, and a lot of work with women business owners and leaders. Every Saturday, I have a Sense and Soul called Sense and Soul, a live Facebook event at 10 a.m. You can find that at Turner Larson Consulting. And that's just 20 minutes of what I call you time. So I talk about things like I talked about here today, being kind to yourself. Um, any tips on incorporating gratitude practice with children? There might be some resources on that. Um, I know that one of my friends and colleagues, she actually does gratitude with her kids, just asking them some questions. And so maybe doing it with them might be helpful. Great. A few aha moments, and the webinar will be recorded. So I have this free Facebook Live every Saturday. And then my book, Becoming You for Women, it's really a manual, lots of information. You can go through it individually, or you can go through it with a group of women. I just felt like there's so much on personal development that I've taken, probably 10 key concepts that I feel are most important. That's what I do in my work. And I've compiled that into my book. And I also think that it's really hard for us to make changes on our own, that we need to do that in community. Good. Brain exercises will be scheduled in. Yeah, thank you, Carly, for the recording. If you do need to want to reach out to me, you can find my contact information on turnerlarson.com and all my social media links as well. I think there's still a few people on. If you have any questions. The only book that I referenced was my own, Becoming You for Women and Hardwiring Happiness. Great. Glad it was helpful. Yeah, one person just put, that it can be common not to be aware of our feelings because we're, really live in a society that's go, go, go and produce, produce, produce. So you're right. That is not uncommon. Actually, I'm going to share a story since some of you are still on about, self-care. One of my clients in a group, we're doing a group, I call it Power Circle group for women leaders. And she just had never taken time for herself. So she took 10 minutes near the end of her day with a cup of tea, no kids around, and just reflected on what was good about her day. And that just became her anchor and continues to be her anchor, like 2 years later. Thank you. Great. Lots of appreciation, which I appreciate as well. Yeah, somebody asked if I recommend journaling. Yeah, I do actually. And my book has lots of journaling prompts. And so one of my friends that's reading it said she's never journaled before. But sometimes we just need to ask ourselves the right questions. What was good about my day? What could I learn? What could I do different? So sometimes we just need some guidelines to help us journal. But yes, one person said, it helps you write out your thoughts, kind of gets things out of our minds.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for taking the time to share with us today. I want to thank everyone who's able to join us today. As we mentioned, you'll be able to view this webinar on demand on our website by the end of the day. Our next upcoming webinar is next Wednesday, and the topic for that is riding the benefit waves of COVID-19. Registration for that is now open on our website. Bye, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Carly.
Thank you. Bye.